Let's talk about two nations, Iran and Israel. If you look at a map, they don't share a border. They're separated by other countries. They don't have some long, tangled colonial history with each other. And yet, right now, they are in a state of open war. It's a real paradox, isn't it? And it's easily one of the most dangerous conflicts on the entire planet.
For decades, this whole thing was fought in the shadows, through proxies, secret assassinations, cyber attacks, all very cloak and dagger. Most experts were warning that a direct war was probably coming, but almost nobody thought it would happen this fast. So to really get how we ended up here, we have to go back. And I mean way back, over 100 years, to the collapse of a massive empire.
So yeah, that's the big question we're tackling here. How on earth did these two countries, with hundreds of miles of desert and other nations between them, become these mortal enemies, locked in a head-to-head military fight? All right, let's hit the rewind button. This story, surprisingly, doesn't actually start with Iran or with Israel. It starts with the empire that used to rule all of it. Okay, so picture this. For 600 years, the Ottoman Empire had been the undisputed ruler of the Middle East. But by the early 20th century, it was falling apart. Then came World War I. They backed the wrong side. And poof, the entire empire just collapsed. So the winners, Britain and France, they come in and basically just start drawing lines on a map, carving up the whole region, and creating the modern Middle East we know today. One of these new territories was called Mandatory Palestine. And this is where things get really complicated. Britain's Balfour Declaration had voiced support for a national home for the Jewish people, but they'd also made promises of independence to the Arabs. At the same time, horrific persecution in Europe meant that Jewish immigration to Palestine was surging. And as you can imagine, local tensions just went through the roof. So after the Second World War and the unimaginable horror of the Holocaust, there was this massive wave of international support for a Jewish state. Britain, totally exhausted from the war, basically threw up its hands and passed the whole problem to the newly formed United Nations. What happens next? Well, it would kickstart a relationship that you probably would not expect. On May 14, 1948, the State of Israel declared its independence. The very next day, 5 Arab armies invaded, planning to wipe it off the map. Against all odds, Israel survived. For Israelis, this was their war of independence, a true miracle. But for Palestinians, this exact same event was the Nakba, which means the catastrophe. Over 700,000 people either fled or were forced from their homes, creating a refugee crisis that, to this day, has never been resolved. I mean, you have two completely opposite, irreconcilable stories for the exact same moment in history.
So where was Iran in all of this? Honestly, they were kind of on the sidelines. See, Iran wasn't an Arab country, it was Persian, and it was ruled by a monarch, the Shah. The Shah really didn't have a dog in the Arab-Israeli fight. In fact, his government had pretty normal relations with Israel. They even worked together on intelligence and military stuff. They were, believe it or not, a quiet partner.
So how in the world did we get from quiet partners to mortal enemies? The answer is one single seismic event that completely changed the character of Iran and really the entire Middle East, forever: the 1979 Iranian Revolution. But, revolutions like this don't just happen out of the blue. Back in 1951, Iran elected a democratic prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh, and he had this big idea. He wanted to nationalize Iran's oil industry, which was basically controlled by the British. Well, Britain and the U.S. were absolutely furious. So in 1953, the CIA and MI6 actually staged a coup, kicked him out, and put the Shah back on the throne. For millions of Iranians, this was a deep, unforgettable humiliation. Their democracy had been snuffed out by foreign powers, all to protect foreign oil. And that resentment just simmered and simmered for decades under the Shah's increasingly harsh rule. And in 1979, that resentment just boiled over. Huge protests forced the Shah to pack his bags and flee the country. And into that massive power vacuum stepped the Ayatollah Khomeini, a radical Islamic cleric who returned from exile to build a brand new kind of government, a theocracy ruled by religious law. The change was total. I mean, it's like looking at two completely different countries. The Shah's Iran was pro-American, mostly secular, and a quiet partner to Israel. But Khomeini's Iran, it was fiercely anti-American. They literally called the U.S. the Great Satan. It was an Islamic theocracy, and from its new point of view, Israel was an illegitimate state, a close ally of that Great Satan, planted right in the heart of the Muslim world. The entire ideology changed, so of course the relationship had to change too. And if anyone had any doubts about this new reality,
Those were erased when Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. They held 52 American diplomats hostage for 444 agonizing days. That event pretty much cemented the permanent hostility between Iran and the West.
Now, with a direct war against America or Israel being way too costly, Iran came up with a new playbook, a strategy it perfected during its absolutely brutal 8-year war with Iraq. And this strategy would define its conflict with Israel for the next 40 years. Welcome to the age of the proxy war. Iran figured out it could fight its enemies, Israel and the United States, without ever having to confront them directly. Instead, it could just fund, train, and arm all these other militant groups across the region to do the fighting for them. It's a way to wage war at arm's length. And man, did they build a network. You've got Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis down in Yemen, and a whole bunch of militias in Iraq and Syria. All together, they formed what analysts started calling a ring of proxies, or even a ring of fire, all surrounding Israel, and all loyal to and armed by Tehran. Now, the one thing that scared Israel more than anything else was the idea of Iran getting a nuclear bomb. The 2015 nuclear deal was supposed to stop that. The deal was, basically, Iran agrees to severely limit its nuclear program, and in return, the world lifts the crippling economic sanctions against it. But then, in 2018, the US pulled out. So Iran, no longer getting the economic benefits, just abandoned its own promises and hit the gas on its nuclear program. The result? The world was suddenly in a much, much more dangerous place. So throughout this whole period, the war stayed in the shadows. Israel was widely blamed for things like assassinating Iranian nuclear scientists and for that infamous Stuxnet computer virus that wrecked a bunch of nuclear centrifuges. On the other side, Iran would use its proxies to attack Israeli targets. It was this deadly, secret dance they were doing. For decades, this shadow war was just the way things were. Yeah, it was unstable, but it was sort of contained. Then, a series of events happened that didn't just crack the dam, they blew it wide open. The October 7th attack by Hamas, a group, remember, that is backed by Iran, didn't just tip the first domino. It slammed it down with incredible force. Israel's massive military response in Gaza then activated Iran's entire network of proxies, and it gave Israel's government the political green light to go after its enemies, including Iran itself, more aggressively than ever before. On that day, Hamas militants killed 1,200 Israelis. It was the deadliest attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. In the war that followed, Gaza's health authorities reported that over 40,000 Palestinians had been killed, creating an absolutely catastrophic humanitarian crisis. And just like that, the shadow war was over. After Israel bombed an Iranian consulate building in Damascus, Iran hit back by launching over 300 drones and missiles in its first-ever direct attack on Israeli soil. The old rules of the game, they were officially gone. Now, our source material actually lays out a possible scenario for what could happen next. It's a dramatic escalation called Operation Epic Fury. In this scenario, you have a massive coordinated U.S.-Israeli military campaign that directly targets Iran. Airstrikes hit all 31 provinces, and Iran's supreme leader is killed. And in retaliation, Iran's Revolutionary Guards shuts down the Strait of Hormuz, which would choke off a huge chunk of the world's oil supply. The shadow war would be a distant memory. All-out war would have begun. So there you have it. From the ashes of a fallen empire, through a revolution that completely remade a nation, to decades of proxy fighting, and now a devastating open war. The path that got us here was long, it was winding, and it was complex. Nobody knows how this is all going to end. We just can't know the future. But now you know how it all started.